My half-brother begged to stay in my house for 2 weeks. He brought his girlfriend. She got pregnant. He lied, saying the house was his. And when they discovered the truth, they refused to leave. But I legally evicted them, and now, years later, he's back begging me to let him return. I'm 32 years old. I work in accounting for a medium-sized company, and about a year and a half ago, I basically had to kick my half-brother out of the house I inherited from my mother. And there are still people in my family who think I was too hard on him. The thing is, my mother died 5 years ago. I mean, it was in 2020, right before everyone went crazy with the pandemic, and she left me the family house. It's a 3-bedroom house in a pretty decent neighborhood. Nothing fancy, but it's not a dump either, you know? My mother had been paying it off for years and years, and I guess she left it to me because I was the one who was always there for her when she got sick, while Kevin, my half-brother, he's like 28 now, basically disappeared for months and only showed up when he needed money or a place to crash. Kevin and I were never super close, honestly. We have the same father but different mothers, and he mostly grew up with his mom in another city. We'd see each other at Christmas and stuff like that, but we weren't like those brothers who talk every day or anything. When my mother died, he showed up to the funeral and everything, acted normal. But when I explained to him that Mom had left the house to me in the will, I saw that face he made, you know? Like resentment but trying to hide it. He didn't say anything in that moment, just nodded and said something like, "Makes sense. You took care of her at the end." But I knew it bothered him. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. But at that moment, I was so deep in grief and dealing with all the paperwork from the will and Mom's debts that I didn't pay much attention to it. The first 2 years after Mom died were weird but quiet. I kept working. The house was paid off, so I only had to worry about utilities and maintenance, and I basically tried to move on with my life as best I could. Kevin and I would text occasionally, superficial stuff like, "How are you?" and that was it. But then, like at the end of 2022, Kevin called me on a Tuesday night. Remember it was Tuesday because I was finishing watching a game, and told me he needed to talk to me urgently. When someone says, urgently like that, you know, trouble's coming, right? So anyway, I agreed to meet him the next day at a coffee shop near my office. Kevin showed up like 20 minutes late, which is typical of him because he's never been punctual in his life. And when he sat down, I could see he had that energy of, I need a big favor. He told me he'd been evicted from his apartment because he was 3 months behind on rent, that he'd lost his job at a warehouse. He think it was like the 5th or 6th time he'd been fired from somewhere in the last few years, and that he basically had nowhere to go. He asked me, or rather begged me, if he could stay at the house with me for just a couple weeks while he found something. He said he had some interviews lined up and that a friend of his was going to help him get a job in construction, and that he literally just needed a temporary place to sleep while he got back on his feet. The truth is, my first instinct was to say no, because I know Kevin and I know what he's like, but I felt bad. He's my brother, you know, and he'd just become homeless, and I had a 3-bedroom house that was practically empty. So I said yes, but I made it very clear to him that it was temporary, maximum 1 month, and that he had to be actively looking for work and contribute something toward household expenses. Kevin agreed to everything super quickly, gave me a hug, and told me I was the best brother in the world, and that he wasn't going to let me down. Spoiler alert, he did let me down, pretty badly. Kevin moved in that same weekend with like 2 backpacks of clothes and nothing else. I gave him the room that used to be my old bedroom when I was a teenager, which had a bed and an old desk but was decent. The first few days were okay. Kevin would get up early, or at least it seemed like it, go out supposedly to look for work, and come back in the afternoon. We'd cook together sometimes, watch TV, and honestly, I thought maybe this could work, and that Kevin was finally going to mature a bit. But like around the 2nd week, I started noticing weird things. Kevin wasn't contributing any money for food, and when I'd ask him how the interviews were going, he always had vague excuses like, "I'm still waiting for them to call me," or, "That company ended up not hiring after all." And then Vanessa appeared. I don't remember exactly when he met Vanessa, but it was like a month after Kevin moved in. One day, I came home from work, and there was a girl in my living room watching Netflix like it was nothing. Kevin introduced her to me very casually, like, "Oh, this is Vanessa, my girlfriend." and she waved at me without getting up from the couch. Vanessa was like 25 years old, I think. She was small, but had that attitude of someone who's always gotten what they want by pouting. From the beginning, she seemed off to me, but I tried to be nice because, well, she was my brother's girlfriend, and supposedly she wasn't going to be there that much. But Vanessa started showing up more and more often, first a few nights a week, then almost every day, until she basically had her own drawer of clothes in Kevin's room and left her stuff in the bathroom like she lived there. I told Kevin we needed to talk, that this had been going on for like 2 months now and he still hadn't found a job, and that also his girlfriend couldn't be basically living there without paying anything. Kevin swore to me he had an interview that week for a warehouse job that paid well, and that Vanessa was just going through a rough patch with her family and needed a temporary place too. I said okay, but that if he got that job he needed to start paying something, at least for utilities and food, and he said yes, of course, as soon as he got his first check he was going to give me money. Obviously that never happened, because Kevin never got that job, or if he had the interview he probably screwed it up, because like 2 weeks later he was still there not doing anything productive. Things got more tense in the house. Vanessa was super comfortable, left her stuff everywhere, ate what I bought without asking, and had this attitude like I was being inconvenient by asking them to contribute. One day, I came home, and she'd literally used all my expensive coffee creamer that I'd bought, and when I said something to her about it, she said, "Oh, sorry, I thought it was for everyone." Kevin wasn't really looking for work either, that was obvious by now. He'd stay home playing video games or watching YouTube videos, and when I'd get home from work and ask him what he'd done that day, he always had excuses. The truth is, I started avoiding being in my own house because the tension was horrible. I'd stay longer at the office or go out with friends, whatever, just so I didn't have to be there. And then Vanessa got pregnant. Kevin told me one night after dinner. He was like super excited and nervous at the same time, and he told me they were having a baby and that they were going to get married. My first internal reaction was like, "Are you kidding me?" But I tried to be positive because what else could I do? I told him congratulations and asked him what their plans were, because now they really, really needed their own place, especially with a baby on the way. Kevin told me, yes, he knew that. They were saving. What if neither of them worked? And as soon as they had enough for a deposit on an apartment, they were going to move out. I gave him like 3 months, until Vanessa was like 4 or 5 months pregnant, and I told him that was the limit. That I'd been patient, but they needed to find their own space. They got married like a month after Vanessa found out about the pregnancy. It was a super small thing at the courthouse with just some of their friends and me. Vanessa looked happy. Kevin looked nervous. And I was basically there wondering how the hell they were going to support a baby if neither of them could hold down a job. After they got married, Vanessa officially moved completely into the house. They didn't even pretend it was temporary anymore. She brought all her stuff, filled Kevin's room closet, and basically took over the shared bathroom with all her pregnancy stuff and vitamins, and I don't know what else. I was reaching my limit, honestly, because now it wasn't just Kevin who was abusing my generosity, but also his wife, who acted like I was the one invading their space, and not the other way around. The moment everything exploded was like when Vanessa was 6 months pregnant, on a Saturday afternoon. I'd gone out to do some shopping and fix a problem with my car that was making a weird noise, and when I got back around 5 in the afternoon, Vanessa was in the living room with 2 of her friends, and they had like moving boxes around them. I walked in and asked what was going on, and Vanessa looked at me with this superior face and told me that she and Kevin had decided they needed more space for the baby. So, they were going to take the master bedroom, which was my bedroom, and that I needed to move to the smaller room. I told her that she was crazy, that this was my house and my bedroom. And that's when Vanessa dropped the bomb. She told me that Kevin had told her the house was his, that our father had left it to him, which was a lie, because the house was my mother's, and she left it to me, and that basically I was the one living there as a freeloader with them. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told her that was completely false, that Kevin had lied to her, and I showed her the papers from my mother's will and the house deeds that I had in my room, where my name was clearly listed as the sole owner. Vanessa went pale. I literally saw her face drop, and she started stammering something like, "But Kevin told me." He assured me that. I told her to go get Kevin, who was in the room, and that we needed to talk, all three of us, immediately. Kevin came down with that face of a kid caught doing something bad, and when Vanessa asked him, screaming, if it was true that he didn't own the house, Kevin couldn't lie anymore and admitted that yes, I was the owner, but that according to him, technically it was both of ours because we were brothers and it was the family house. Vanessa went crazy. She screamed at Kevin that he was a liar. How could he have done that to her? That she had left her job, which as far as I knew she never had, and her apartment, which she'd also been kicked out of, because Kevin had promised her they had their own house. Kevin tried to calm her down, but she was furious, and honestly, so was I. I told Kevin they had 2 weeks to find another place and get out, that this had completely gotten out of control. Vanessa screamed at me that I was a heartless bastard. How could I throw out a pregnant woman? And she left the house in a rage. Kevin just stood there like an idiot and tried to explain to me that he didn't mean to lie, he just wanted Vanessa to feel secure and didn't think it would be a problem. And I told him I didn't give a damn about his excuses to go sleep in the guest room that night because I was too angry to keep talking to him. That night was horrible. I barely slept thinking about everything that had happened and how I'd been so stupid to let things get this far. The next morning, Kevin told me Vanessa had gone to her mother's house and that he was going to look for a place to move. I said perfect. He had until the end of the month because we were already like mid-month, so I was giving him like 2.5 weeks. I thought this was finally going to resolve itself, but Kevin did absolutely nothing to look for a place. Days went by, and every time I asked him how the search was going, he'd tell me he was on it, that he'd seen some places but needed more time to get the deposit together. I told him that wasn't my problem, that I'd been more than generous and it was over. When the deadline I'd given him came, Kevin was still there. I told him he needed to leave that day. And Kevin told me I couldn't just kick him out like that he was technically a tenant and had rights, and that if I wanted to get him out, I had to go through a legal eviction process. I couldn't believe my own brother was telling me this, like using legal technicalities so he could stay in my house without paying anything. I told him he was being ridiculous, but Kevin stood firm and told me he wasn't leaving until he had a place to move to, and that legally I couldn't do anything without a formal process. I looked it up online and found out the bastard was right. Even though we never had a contract or anything, since he'd been living there for several months, he was technically considered a tenant, and I needed to give him a formal eviction notice. I went to a lawyer that same week, explained the whole situation to him, and the lawyer told me I needed to fill out some papers and give Kevin a legal eviction notice with 2 weeks advance warning. It cost me like $500 to start the whole process. Money I was never going to get back, but I was so fed up, I didn't care. I delivered the papers to Kevin personally, and when he read them, he looked at me with this mix of surprise and anger and told me he couldn't believe his own brother was suing him. I told him he was the one who decided to play with legal technicalities instead of just doing the right thing and leaving when I asked him nicely. Kevin didn't talk to me during those days. He stayed in his room almost all the time, only came out to eat something quick, and avoided any contact with me. Those 2 weeks were eternal. The tension in the house was unbearable. I made sure to keep all my important documents and valuables locked in my room because I didn't trust Kevin anymore at all. I called a locksmith to change the locks as soon as Kevin left, because I didn't want him to have any way to get back in. Finally, the day came. Kevin packed his stuff, which was more than he had when he arrived because Vanessa had left a bunch of clothes and baby stuff, called a friend with a pickup truck, and left without saying a word to me. He didn't even look at me when he walked out the door. I just stood there watching him load the boxes, and I didn't feel relief or sadness, just exhaustion. You know? Exhaustion from all the drama and the time I wasted trying to help someone who clearly didn't want to help himself. I changed the locks that same day, cleaned the room where Kevin had been, which was a disaster with dirty clothes and trash, and tried to get back to my normal life. I didn't hear anything from Kevin for months. I blocked Vanessa on all social media because she'd sent me like 50 messages calling me everything and telling me it was my fault if her baby ended up on the street. Some cousins told me later that Kevin had moved in with a friend and that Vanessa was still at her mother's house and that their relationship was super bad. Honestly, I wasn't surprised at all, but it didn't give me any satisfaction to hear it either. I just didn't care anymore. Like a year after all that, a cousin sent me a message telling me Vanessa had had the baby, a girl, and that literally 2 weeks later she'd filed for divorce from Kevin. Apparently, Kevin had been getting into more trouble, still couldn't hold down a job, and Vanessa finally got tired of his lies and irresponsibility. My cousin sent me a photo of the baby that Vanessa had posted on Facebook, and honestly, I felt something weird, like guilt mixed with sadness, because that little girl didn't ask to be born into such a messed up situation with parents who clearly weren't ready to have her. But I also knew I wasn't responsible for Kevin's decisions, and that if I'd kept quiet and let them keep living in my house for free, they'd probably still be there taking advantage of me. About 3 months ago, Kevin tried to contact me again. He sent me a message on Instagram because I had him blocked on WhatsApp and on my phone, saying he wanted to talk, that he'd been thinking a lot about everything that happened, and that he regretted how he acted. I read it but didn't answer him. A week later, he sent me another longer message telling me Vanessa had left him, that he was living in a super small rented room, that he barely saw his daughter because Vanessa wouldn't let him, and asking if I could consider giving him another chance and letting him stay at the house again, that this time it would be different. He told me he'd matured, that everything that happened had taught him a lesson, and that he was going to pay me rent and everything. I blocked him on Instagram too. I didn't answer him a single word because I knew that if I started a conversation, Kevin was going to try to manipulate me again with his whole "we're family and I need help" routine. I learned my lesson. Honestly. You can want to help someone all you want, but if that person doesn't really want to change or make the effort, you're just going to end up exhausted and resentful, and probably worse off than you were before you tried to help. Kevin is my brother, and he'll always be my brother. But that doesn't mean I have to let him destroy my peace of mind and my life again. Sometimes I still wonder if I did the right thing, especially when I think about my niece who I've never met and probably never will meet. But then I remember all the times Kevin lied to me, all the times he promised to change and never did, and how Vanessa tried to kick me out of my own house, and I know I made the right decision. You can't save someone who doesn't want to save themselves, and you definitely can't sacrifice your own stability trying to do it. My house is quiet now. My bills are in order, and I don't have to deal with the constant drama that came with having Kevin and Vanessa there, and that, I guess, is enough.